Hi everyone, Ray Poynter here, and we're going to be looking at the state of insights in September 2023. So first of all, I'm going to draw on a piece of work from NewMR, which specifically looks at the state of insights. We're just finishing the field work of the second wave, so the data in here for the second wave is nearly complete, but it is partial data. We're not expecting many changes, and we're going to compare that with June. And one of the key questions in this study is how optimistic are people in our industry around the world? And the answer is pretty optimistic. About 2/3 of us are generally optimistic or very optimistic. But it's worth remembering there are about 10% who are not optimistic about the future of insights. And you're going to see some very clear reasons why they might not be optimistic, and actually why, while the world is good for some people, it's not good for everybody. Interesting to see how little change there was between the June wave of this survey and the September wave. There will be another wave in December, and again, we'll see what sort of differences we get there. One of the questions we asked people was, what were the main positive things about insights at the moment? And overwhelmingly, it's around the theme of AI, lots and lots of generative AI. There are some other things in there as well: qualitative research, decision-making, understanding changing world. So we dug into that and drew out 3 themes. The first of those is embracing new technologies like artificial intelligence, like machine learning. Here's a couple of example quotes specifically talking about that. The second topic was actually in many ways more rewarding emotionally: increased demand for research and insights. So a lot of people talking about the fact there is still a lot of good research out there, a lot of proven research principles driving good research. And the final one is this interest in quality. And we're going to see that coming through. And this interest in human expertise. Maybe the advent of AI's sudden emergence, its overnight success after 70 years of being developed, has really allowed us to focus a bit more on the role of human expertise. But those are the 3 key themes. We also asked people, what is the most negative or worrying things at the moment? And you'll see that AI comes up again. And right through this presentation, we're going to see that artificial intelligence, automation, machine learning are seen as a double-edged sword. People can see a lot of the good, but there are also concerns about the impact of AI, generative AI, but also budget cuts, client budgets, research budgets, inflationary pressures are an issue. So is the issue of data quality. Pulling those out as themes, the top theme was concerns about AI. So the most positive thing was AI. The most negative thing were concerns about AI, not really acknowledging the impact on the industry, its impact on quality, and all sorts of associated issues. The next issue is potential recession, the impact on client budgets, ongoing concern. And the third relates to data quality and sample sources. I'm going to come back to this 2 or 3 times. There is an immense amount of concern about the quality of data, in particular from online panels. We also asked people, what do you expect to be using more of over the next 18 months? The number one theme, not surprisingly, we're going to be using more AI. To be honest, most people weren't using much AI before, so it's not hard to use more. People like the panel companies have been using it for years. Some of the analytics companies have been using it a long time. Some of the coding companies, but it's going to be in much more general use. What else were people going to be using more of? More qual and more qual quant. This increase in data is generating a focus on more qualitative. More platforms and digital tools. Not surprisingly, they're going to get smarter. There's been an absolutely massive expansion of them in the last few years. The growth in this term, res tech, research technology. And people expecting to do more analysis. If we have more automation, we should have more time to do better analysis. And we've got tools for visualization like Tableau. So an expectation to be doing more analysis in that process. What do people say they're going to be using less of? Well, the single most common thing people said was, there's nothing in particular I'm going to be using less of. Now, that was less than 50%, but it was the single most common response. We're not expecting in the next 18 months to have stopped using or massively reduced anything that we're doing at the moment. The sorts of things that people did say they were going to reduce, the 60-odd% who listed something, then less in-person or face-to-face research. Not surprisingly, I think. Less of everything traditional. I think that's quite an interesting concept. The more we start doing new stuff with artificial intelligence, etc., then of course we're going to do less of something somewhere. And perhaps the most obvious no-brainer, less manual processing, so less manual coding of open-ended response, less building of PowerPoint slides. So that's the picture there. I'm going to jump to another source of information. This was published about a week ago at the SMR Congress. It's the SMR Global Market Research Report. It's probably the single most valuable reference item in our industry for a really broad picture. If you're a member of SMR, it's free, so I encourage you to download it. If you're not a member of SMR, you can buy a copy, but you might find it's cheaper to join SMR actually, so I'm going to give them a plug here. And I've pulled out one or two interesting things. So for the last few years, there's been this term, established market research. And this is what we think of as market research. This is online surveys. This is face-to-face surveys. This is telephone surveys. This is face-to-face focus groups. This is online focus groups, all of that sort of thing. And it's a big industry, $47 billion around the planet. It's growing, but at the moment, it's not growing faster than inflation. So in real terms, the amount of money being spent is declining slightly. The next category is called the tech-enabled. This is all the platforms, or it's the res tech, all these CX platforms, social media listening platforms, things like that. And it has been growing strongly. If you look in 2020, it was a chunk smaller than the established sector. It had almost caught up in 2021. And in 2022, we see that tech-enabled is actually bigger than the established market research, the bit that we think of as market research. Why these numbers 2022? Because they're done from companies' turnover figures. Their turnover figures only become available in about April or May the following year. So by the time you've added up all those numbers, you're through to September. So when we're talking about real spend figures, it is always the previous year. And it's usually towards the end of this year that we get good data for last year. And the final category is reporting. So this is the big consultancies, and it's the Forresters, and it's the Gartners, and it's these big companies that collect automated data and then sell it as reports and downloads. It has also been growing. And what we look at now, if we look at the picture in 2022, is established market research is heading towards being only a third of the insights business. So this phrase about whether we use the term market research or insights is actually becoming important for an additional reason, because in the insights industry, market research anyway is probably only about a third of that business. So some really big changes going on. Let's look at that geographically. So if we take that established market research sector, as I said, it's about $47 billion globally. Nearly half of that is spent in the United States. Our insights industry is massively dominated by the United States, which means it's massively dominated by the English language. The second strongest country is the United Kingdom. Again, bringing that language into play, which has got some strengths for speed of generation. It's got some weaknesses for making the products very Anglo-Saxon and maybe a little bit less flexible than they should be or could be. And we see that outside of Europe and the United States, it comes just to 13 million out of 47 billion. So it's about a quarter outside that narrow developed part of the world. If we go to ResTech, $50 billion globally, it's nearly 2/3 United States spending dollars. This is where the home to so many of the platforms is. It's where the money is being spent. APAC and rest of world down to about 16% of all the dollars being spent. So they are under indexing in this fast growing area. Europe's sort of holding its own, but the US strongly moving ahead in this tech-enabled area. And if we go to reporting, it's somewhere between the two. The USA is over 50% of this industry, and rest of world plus Asia Pacific is a much smaller part, about 20% of the whole picture. So we have an industry that is very big, it's very strong, and it's very US dominated at the moment. I'm going to highlight just one more thing out of the Global Market Research Report. I'm highlighting maybe 3% of all the really interesting stuff in there. I do urge you to access the original report. But it's to emphasize this point about qual that I mentioned from the NewMR Insight study. Qual is holding up really well. It actually grew from 14 percentage points of the market research world to 16. So 2 percentage points growth, gone up by a seventh. There is still around the world quite a lot of face-to-face depth. There is still quite a lot of face-to-face focus groups. There is still quite a lot of face-to-face ethnography. There is also, of course, a lot of digital qualitative research, and that's good. But I do want to make the point about how healthy this area is. The next area of background information I want to draw on is a study that started actually as a NewMR study. It's now an SMR and partner study. You can see the partners here, the Japanese Market Research Association, the Insights Association, the MRS from the UK, the TRS from Australia, lots and lots of partners. NewMR is still the second largest contributor of information into this study. And this looks at just the client side, the users and the buyers of research. And what we see, and we've seen this for a couple of years now, is there is almost 50-50 in the number of projects that are conducted internally and the number of projects where the client will go to an agency. Now, this is not spend. Spend doesn't work as a very good metric between internal and external, because externally you do spend money, internal costs, but not in the same way. So we do this on the basis of number of projects. And so nearly 50% of all research projects are done internally by clients and about 50% are external. The key enabler for this was that growth in ResTech that I talked about, the platforms. That is what made it possible for so much more to be internal. And AI is going to enhance that. It's going to lead to something which I'm going to call smart DIY or smart self-serve. When we asked people, how is this changing? About half of the client side insights professionals that we surveyed said internal is increasing. 7% said it's decreasing. There are always people swimming in the other direction with any trend. There are always people going the other way. But overwhelmingly, the trend is either to lock in this division of 50-50 or for internal to increase. We asked the users and buyers a number of questions, open-ended questions, to find out what was going on. And we said, what are the main things that you choose to do internally? And they were CRM studies, they were simple studies, low risks, simple surveys, usability, and CX research. So that all makes a lot of sense. What is external? Well, large and complex, not surprisingly. Specialists are needed for those. Anything that looks at the whole market. If we're trying to understand the whole market, there are too many biases when that is done internally. And at the moment, the strategic high-risk research tends to go out. A lot of it, of course, will go out to consultants, not necessarily to traditional market research agencies. What are the main issues for insight teams inside their organization? They're trying to deliver actionable insights. They're trying to influence change. They don't just want to be order takers. They actually want to influence the direction of the company, and they need to be more agile. What were the things they wanted agencies to do more of? The first is they want to understand their company better. They want the agency to be a partner. The next is they want strategic analysis and consultancy from their agencies, and they want expertise and specialization. So we see this expertise and specialization coming up again, and it is a theme. However, at the risk of offending the many clients on the line today, most clients prevent 1 and 2 from happening. They don't share enough background information. They don't pay for enough skills and time for suppliers to be genuine partners, to be strategic analysts, and to offer a real consultancy process. It's not rare these days for me to see a client-side organization buy its data from one agency and then hire freelance consultants to come in and work on that information set. There has to be a better solution, I feel, where agencies are able to get much closer to those clients and deliver what is clearly wanted and needed. Next source we're going to draw, I'm really being very eclectic here, trying to pull from right across the industry, is the Green Book Research Industry Trends. This is the 2023 GRIT. And if we look at what clients are adopting, they're adopting agile methods and approaches. We saw that this is one of the key drivers from the users and buyer studies. They want to be more agile. They're looking out for agile methods. They're looking at data integration, and they're looking at text analytics. If we contrast that with what suppliers are doing, their number one issue is alternatives to panel samples, this issue about the data quality. Clients don't see the data quality issues as closely as the agencies see it. The agencies are having to do a massive amount of work to tidy up that data. Then they're interested in agile methods and data integration and text analytics, just like the clients. And they also add in mobile qualitative. And if you look over the history of the GRIT studies, you will see that agencies and suppliers are much more interested in how research is done than most clients are, because they have to do it. They have to produce these things. So there is a wider set of interest, by and large, on the supplier side than on the client side. One of the things we see from the bottom end of the table of adoption is specialists are becoming more specialist. There are fewer agencies now as a percentage who say we do neuroscience, we do biometrics, we do behavioral science, we do advanced gamification, we do Internet of Things. The percentage of agencies that are offering those specialities is declining. The absolute number might be going up because the number of agencies is going up at any one time. But what we're seeing is specialists are becoming more special and less general. When GRIT looked at the buzz topics, they very kindly let NewMR and our Word Cloud Plus do the analysis of that. And what we can see is the main buzz topic is artificial intelligence. So another cross-reference triangulation. But we also see all these issues about data quality and data collection coming in there, and sample quality. All of these are real issues for our industry. What were the key client views that we saw coming back in that GRIT study? The first was they try to select their agencies primarily on data quality and service quality. Things like being really clever, having the best tech, having the best technologies, having the best approaches matter, but nothing like as much as data quality and service quality. Key elements used, online surveys, that is no change. If you look back over the historic data in GRIT, that isn't change. But now their number 2 and number 3 have jumped up from being like 5 and 6 or 6 and 7 up to being 2 and 3. Much more use of storytelling, much more use of data visualization. And if you think about it, this links really well with trying to influence change in the organization. It's not just about finding the answers, it's trying to influence change. This is a bit grim. So this is overall satisfaction with the suppliers. And satisfaction here means people who said completely or very satisfied. 52% is not a great score for overall satisfaction. What were the main problems? Only 36% were satisfied with value for cost. Only 35% were satisfied with the recommendations they were getting from the agencies, and only 32% were satisfied with the data visualization. And that bottom one is really something that you would think agencies could tackle with all the tools around now available. That is something tackleable. The next source I'm drawing on is something with really good news and really bad news. So the really good news is the Insights Association, the MRS, the Research Society, SampleCon, the Austrian Research Society, CRIC from Canada, and SMR are all working together to tackle the problem of global data quality, because there's a really big concerns about the quality of data. The bad news, I guess, is that the problem is so bad that all of these organizations are working together to a level they've never worked together before, because everybody recognizes there is an existential threat to the way we collect data at the moment. There are now so many people trying to hack and defraud the system. There are so many bad surveys. There are conversations out there saying about a third of a typical online panel survey is bad data. And that, of course, is really worrying. But when I see the analysis done by these organizations here, about a third of that bad data is caused by bad surveys, bad questions, bad specifications. And that is shocking. So whilst all these organizations are doing more and more that they can to tackle the fraud and the hackers and so on, the research industry really needs to be tackling the quality of surveys, the engagement, and so on in that process. Two sources left, and this is the penultimate one. I've gone to the International Monetary Fund to have a look at the global economy. And we are probably going to have a slightly worse time, 2023 and 2024, but not much globally. 2022 was 3.5% growth. That's going to drop in real terms down to about 3%. However, very different by different places. The United States, 2022 was just a bit under par at 2.1, but 23 and 24 look to be slightly worse. The Euro area had a good 2022, but is looking like a bad 23 and 24. By contrast, we've got much stronger in sub-Saharan Africa, and emerging and developing Asia are stronger markets. Of course, the United States will stay much, much richer than the other areas, and the Euro area will stay the second most richest area. But in terms of direction of travel, we're going to feel some pressure. And the final source I'm drawing on are, I'm lucky enough to get to a lot of conferences, to have a lot of conversations with people from right around the world. This is a clip from the SMR Congress recently. So I've been listening to the vibe. One of the things that's really obvious is lots and lots of companies, including some of the biggest names in our industry, have hiring freezes. Some of them are downsizing. You'll notice in places like LinkedIn, people saying available to hire, or talking about their friends who are now available to hire. So that is an indicator of some fragility in the industry, but also some reshaping, because the nature of the business is changing. Of course, the bigger trend is downsizing and freezers, but there are plenty of companies out there who are booming as well. There are quite a lot of companies up for sale, but when I talk to people in the mergers and acquisitions business, too many of the vendors are overpricing their product. They don't realize that they're now in a bit of a distressed sale market. So they're not going to get the value that they thought they were going to get. Live events are back. I've been to several of them, and I'm going to be heading off shortly to Mongolia for the APRC conference. I'm then lucky enough to go off to Singapore for the Asia Pacific Innovation. And we're seeing great attendances, over 1,200 people in Amsterdam. So that is fantastic. And people are really relishing that human contact, going out, having social events, and so on. What are the main worries that I'm hearing? The number one worry is the economy. Lots and lots of that. The next one are the negative effects from artificial intelligence. And the third one is this data quality issue. So between the three of them, those are what is keeping people up at night, particularly the owners of companies, particularly the CFOs and the CEOs and the COOs, worrying about them. So we always need to think about black swans. Black swans are the unexpected things that don't come from the normal distribution, that suddenly appear. Pandemics, economic crashes, wars expanding beyond where they already are, impacts of climate catastrophe. What happens if there's a really big technology crash or hack on the internet, the communication systems? Legislation straitjackets. We've missed several bullets over the last 10 or 15 years where organizations like the MRS, SMR, the Insights Association have lobbied governments because they were going to pass laws that would have made research much harder. So those could still always occur, a new case. What about a really big data disaster? The anti-science culture. So something like 20% of people in Europe now and in North America have a very anti-science view, including some of the politicians and leaders. That is really in opposition to market research and insights, because we are based on evidence-based decision-making. And what might AI do in disruption? So let's have a quick dive into AI as the last topic. It's the biggest thing going on at the moment. We do need to focus, as well as focusing on the market research and insights, the bigger picture. So we had a great keynote presenter, Amelia Coleman, at the SMR Congress, and she was making the point about how bad for the environment artificial intelligence is, how much open AI uses in terms of energy. And the average computer scientist estimate of AI's ability to end humankind is now at 5%. So that is something we should keep a bit of an eye on. But of course, our focus is going to be in the research world. What is AI doing today? So talking to clients, some of them are actually banning any use of AI, particularly Google's Bard, OpenAI's ChatGPT, and most clients are very much in a wait and see mode. However, there are lots of experiments, but so many of them are biased one way or the other. So people who don't like AI are proving it doesn't work by setting up tests, which when I look at them, I say, well, of course that wouldn't work. And then I'm seeing people that are simply too pro AI, proving it works because they're setting up tests. When you look at it, you say, yeah, I can see why that works, but it doesn't generalize. We need some better testing, some more rigorous assessments of when will AI work, when will it not work, and how might it change. There are lots of products and services out there. Some people are experimenting, but there are lots of real products. Look out for the word Copilot. A lot of people are using this term Copilot. There are lots of options for synthetic data already on the market. Text analytics, lots of options already on the marketplace. The associations, so SMR, Insights Association, MRS, etc., looking at what the codes and guidelines are. I think that the sort of route we're taking at SMR, which is looking at principles, is probably going to be the quickest way to move forward, because it's so hard to be definitive about the speed of change. So if we can talk general principles and then look at how those can be applied, that should hopefully work better. Perhaps developing a set of questions like the 37 questions you can ask for panel companies. What's coming soon, this year and next year, in AI? I think we're going to see legislation, and some of it will be helpful and some of it will hurt. And it will be different in different parts of the world. So keep an eye out for legislation. Synthetic data is going to be enormous. I like to talk about synthetic data with two scenarios. Imagine it works. If synthetic data works in some situations, it's going to be faster, it's going to be cheaper. And even if it's not as good, that is still a really big market. Now let's imagine synthetic data doesn't work. How would you know? It's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy to show that synthetic data doesn't work. So again, it's going to take business. It's going to grow because of its speed and because of its cheapness. We're going to see a lot of smart DIY, so the self-serve tools with guardrails so that people are not going to ask such strange questions. They're not going to make the wrong assumptions nearly so often if they use smart self-serve. We're going to see some new solutions, so keep your eyes out. ResearchWise AI is the latest product from the Future Place, and you'll be hearing about that over the next couple of weeks. And big changes, and I'm just going to read out this prediction. Over the next 10 years, AI will be a bigger disruptor than the internet was for insights and research was in its first 10 years. It's going to be that scale of change. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions. And we do have some questions. So I'm just pulling the chat and Q&A tool down. To be fair, clients might not know that market researchers can be more integrated into their strategy. How do we bridge this gap? I think it's conversations. I think that agencies need to have more conversations outside of the sales cycle. So one of the things that I often recommend is after the debrief, contacting the client again and say, can we have another chat with you now about the nice to knows? Because in the study, we found a lot of nice to knows. We obviously didn't include those in the debrief because that would have been a distraction. We'd like to talk to you about those and about how we could help you interpret this information more. I think that is the right time to talk to the client. It's not so much when you're pitching for the work, when there's a lot of comparative distrust. But after you've shown that you've done a good piece of work, that's the time to have those conversations and to invest time in the clients. Could you explain a bit more what anti-science culture means, please? Yes. So there was a protest over the weekend against The Voice in Australia. The Voice is a referendum amendment where they're saying that when something affects the Aboriginal and Torres Straits Island communities, they would need to be consulted. They don't overrule it, they don't get a vote, but they would have to be consulted. And there are protests from some Australians against that process. In the process, there were people campaigning against mobile 5G. There were people campaigning against vaccinations for the pandemic and coronavirus. There were people campaigning against 15-minute cities. There is a growth in people believing really weird stuff and in news. We see this with populist politicians in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, in North America, who do not take a scientific point of view and are able to get quite a lot of strength. And if you look at things like the Pew Research Center, who do global research, this is a strong phenomenon where people dismiss science. Oh, the other thing that people were complaining about in Australia in that process, climate change hoax was one of their issues. So that's what's going on there. What kind of synthetic data do you think we will see? Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about the synthetic data we've already got. So any time that you do choice modeling, almost any time, you are likely to use hierarchical Bayes as a method of solving the values. That creates synthetic data. It creates a new distribution that matches the perceived thing and then delivers values back to the individuals. But those individuals are synthetic. They're not the people you collected. Another synthetic data, which is already common, is synthetic eye tracking. So eye tracking used to be done by, you'd sit somebody down at a machine, you'd track their eyes while they watched the new packet or the new magazine. Now these synthetic eye tracking predict where people would have looked. That's a service that's already available. So I think we're going to see several types of synthetic data. I think we will see most of the panel companies and large holders of data being able to create synthetic respondents based on lookalikes, matches to people who are really in the data. I think we will see a lot more sparse data collection where you have a survey with, let's say you've got a survey with 100 questions, you ask everybody 10 questions, and then you estimate what the other 90 questions would have been by applying pattern matching and so on. I think we will also see a lot of qualitative where you will say create personas, and then you can run a chat with those people as well. So one I've seen is you can get a whole bunch of millennials and you can get a marketing manager talking to 5 or 6 millennials, each with a slightly different characteristic. We don't know yet how good and how bad that is going to be, but that is clearly going to be a good part of the near future. And no matter how bad it is, it will get better. There are some fundamental concerns about it. Let's say we were to switch over entirely to synthetic panel data. That might work really well in 2024. But if we collected no new panel data in 2024, by 2025, it'd be really out-of-date information. And people would optimize in order to get the right scores from those synthetic data. So there's going to be quite a learning process in there, but I do expect it to be big. So full synthetic data, whole survey taken by ChatGPT of 500 sample size. Yes, I'm seeing some people talk about that, where you create artificial people. I can't imagine, other than a little bit of cost, why you would create 500. So one of the ways you work with things like ChatGPT is you create agents. So you do your work in parallel. You could create 500 agents and 500 interviewers, which is the interview software. They would interview them and they would collect that. But I would expect the numbers that are in synthetic data to be by and large much larger than 500 when we do that. So part human and part ChatGPT. I wouldn't hang up too much on ChatGPT. I think that a lot of the synthetic data will not be ChatGPT oriented. I think it will be using AI, absolutely, but it will be looking at creating patterns, training new sets of learning. So what are the key next steps in generative AI is AI which is trained on your data set rather than general data sets. Do you know why clients are banning porting the use of BARD? Are there any lessons for agencies here? I would think the single biggest reason is fear of law. So there have been some really strange things going on. One of them is the quite correct fear of any intellectual property going from a client. So let's say you're a large pharmaceutical company. You really do not want any of your information to go into these tools, but you do want to take information out of them, and just getting their head around which bits goes into the training data, where is the data for that information stored, is it SOC 2 compliant, all of those steps. So it's easier for the compliance team and the lawyers just to tell everybody not to use it than it is to say you can use it this way, but not this way. I think it's untenable. I think that they are simply going to fall behind if they don't allow some of the uses. And of course, nearly every one of them is using one type of AI. When they write a report, many of them use Grammarly to improve it. Grammarly is AI. Grammarly is probably learning from your writing too. And in fact, if you're a professional Grammarly user, you get a report back each week and it tells you how many unique words you did and what sort of mistakes you make and how you're learning. So it is very much gathering information about what you do as well. Would using AI to automate analysis have a lower carbon footprint than human analysis? Similar for synthetic data and traditional respondent data. I guess we do know the typical carbon footprint for typical research projects. That probably varies from country to country. So how are we collecting it? If we were to compare a study in Africa where we're using smartphones and tablets to do face-to-face research, then you could compare that with sort of an AI version. But I think the concern is that we do much more. So it's not just the bit of analysis we do, but it's the training. The training creates a really big load. The additional training going forward creates big load. We then keep that information available. We do real-time dashboards. One could imagine metaverse debriefs in the future, which are going to be incredibly intensive. So I think making really clear, sustainable energy consumption targets around the insights process, whether it's conventional, whether it's digital, whether it's AI, would be a really good step forward. And that's all of the questions. Thank you all for listening and tuning in, and thank you to our sponsors who will appear on a screen shortly. Bye for now.